Okay, well, welcome to Rotary, everybody. We are, of course, Rotarians of action, and we change lives, and Rotarians are going places, as witnessed today with this wonderful program that we have. So to get us started, our greeters today are Nicole Franson and Bill Douglas. If you could both say hello to the group.
Well, I'll go first. Hello. I hope everybody is enjoying the beautiful weather we've had, hot, cold, and everything in between. Being part of this group has reminded me the importance of taking the time out of your day to connect to one another. I'm sure a lot of us have been spending a lot of time, knees deep in work, regardless of our industries. So I've been reminded, especially as a mom of a 2-year-old, to take time for myself and to connect with my peers professionally and personally. So I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you guys each week. And I hope you all feel the same and are doing some self-care.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Bill, are you able to say hello this morning?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I just want to welcome Jeff back to Yakima. He's one of my favorite people, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation today. And I hope we have a full house to hear him.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. So next up, we've got Nick Helms with some special music for us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for letting me do this today. I've known that I'm going to be on for music for a little over a month now, and so I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you. And I have been during all the quarantine time, I've been learning about recording my own music, and so I decided to record an old hymn of the church, one that means a lot to me. I'm a man of faith, and so I recorded a version of Great is Thy Faithfulness, which is set for 8 trumpets. And there's a statement by the writer of this song who was reflecting on his life. It wasn't a life that was filled with great success or wealth, but he said, "I must not fail to record here the unfailing faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God, and that he has given me many wonderful displays of his providing care, for which I am filled with astonishing gratefulness." And that statement rang true for me as I read it, thinking about my God who has always been faithful to me. And so I hope that the melody of this song will bless you today, as it does for me. And without further ado, this is Great is Thy Faithfulness, words by Thomas Chisholm, music by William Runyon, and has been arranged for 8 trumpets by Joel Mott and James Olcott. So Carolyn, go for it.
Wow, that was absolutely amazing. If we were meeting in person, we'd have to clone Nick 8 times, which, I'm fully in support of anyway, Nick, but it's absolutely amazing to get to hear you on Zoom and to have that kind of performance. It's exceptional. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. Absolutely. With our invocation, we've got David Kobia.
Great. Thank you, President Jennifer. Wow, that was incredible. I feel like I could just end my invocation right now. That was the perfect prayer through music. So thank you, Nick. If everyone would like to take the time, I'll go ahead and offer a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before thee this afternoon, so very grateful for the many blessings we receive from thee. We're grateful for this chance we have to come together with different beliefs, different backgrounds, but unified as Rotarians who believe in service above self. We are so very grateful, Father, for this technology that allows us to come together and find ways to serve. We're grateful that Jeff could be with us today, that we can learn about new and upcoming technologies, and we pray that we'll find ways to use these technologies to benefit mankind, that we'll be able to have increased communication and understanding, that we'll be able to increase opportunities for education and economic growth. We pray for ways to better provide healthcare to those that are in most need. We're grateful, Father, for the beautiful valley we have to live in, and we pray that that would help us find ways to serve those around us, especially those that are the most vulnerable and those needing assistance. We are grateful for our leadership in our Rotary group, and we pray that would bless President Jennifer and her family, support and strengthen the board and the committee chairs as they work to serve the community. We pray for a blessing on those who serve our community, those leaders of our city, our county, our state and nation. Give them the guidance which they need, Father, to direct and guide us in this beautiful country. Father, we're grateful for all the blessings we receive at thy hand, and pray for these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
What a beautiful blessing, David. Thank you so much. We now have an opportunity to hear from Southwest Rotary President Martin Strike. Martin.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, so I appreciate having a moment to share with you that Southwest Rotary is holding an event on Saturday, August 22nd. So that's 2 Saturdays from now. And it's a 5K walk, run, or bike event. And the idea here is to get a little bit of physical activity and at the same time help to contribute to the Rotary Foundation and the End Polio Now cause. As I'm sure many of us have been seeing emails, the Rotary Foundation is in some need of support. And we all know that the money that goes to the foundation also ends up coming back to our clubs in our district in the form of matching grants. So we thought we could help out by putting on this event. So the idea is very simple. So there's a sign up link that will be shared with you. And the idea is that on Saturday, August 22nd, no matter where you are, whether you're in Wyoming, Montana, the west side here in Yakima, just find a place to go for a 5K walk, a run, bike, or if you're so inclined, a kayak ride, as you can see over my shoulder. The idea is just get out and get some physical activity. And the request is, if you do it by yourself, is to donate $30, or if you want to do it with some family and friends, a $50 donation would be appreciated. The money will be credited to your Paul Harris fund, and as you know, it goes to a great cause. The other important aspect here is that we do ask that you take some selfies, some pics along the way, and share it with us so that we can put that on the Facebook and social media, and just do another way of showing what Rotary does for the community. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for sharing that with us, Martin. I think it's going to be a fantastic event, and to be able to share those pictures virtually is wonderful. Next up, we've got Chris Hales with Sergeant at Arms.
Afternoon. Can we talk? I mean, like about serious stuff. I hate it when people call it conspiracy theories because, you know, there is so much that we are not being told. Like take Area 51, for example. This is a military installation that does not show up on any map. Why is that? Sure, the government says that it's used to test experimental aircraft, but we all know that it's really doing secret experiments on aliens that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947. It's even been told that Area 51 is where they staged the moon landing. If you believe that we actually landed on the moon, you need to send Carolyn an extra $20 this month. I mean, really. Moving on. Do you really think that Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird? It's said that her and Truman Capote were really good childhood friends, and she never really wrote anything else, so. Washington State is where Bigfoot lives. He may show up in lots of other states, but he's been seen here over 2,000 times, always accompanied by a blurry picture from afar, which is proof that he likes Washington best. And why is he always called a he? Maybe it's a she. And speaking of creatures, do you know what lives in Flathead Lake over in Montana? Why, Nessie, of course, with her steel black eyes, the Loch Ness Monster has somehow transported from Scotland to Montana. I mean, 109 people have seen her, so. There's a secret chamber at Mount Rushmore. It's behind President Lincoln's head. So in there is reported to be the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the US Constitution. It's not open to the public, but it crates some of our most treasured documents. What else is in there? I mean, who can trust the government? In Idaho, 2,000 geese fell from the sky and they were found dead. This was a direct result of the poisonous chemtrails. Which brings us to 5G. This is a government cover-up for sure. They roll out a pandemic so that they can put us all in lockdown while they erect all these towers. I mean, it might be a military-grade weapon. In addition, the spread of COVID-19 is piggybacking on the airwaves and spreading the virus quicker. The fact that COVID is spread in areas where there are no 5G towers is completely irrelevant. Back to you, Jennifer.
I love it. I'm sure Jeff will comment on that during this program. So next up with our program introduction is Kevin Good, joining us all the way from Lake Chelan today. Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And I apologize in advance if you hear some background noise. The best Wi-Fi it is here at the clubhouse, and we have 2 pools behind me, and apparently it's the day to mow the lawn for everyone. So again, I apologize if you hear that. But it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Bradley. And before I do so, I must first give a big warm shout out to Priscilla Forney, Jeff's doting mother. Without Priscilla, I would not know of Jeff's conquests and how proud she is of her son is illuminated in each conversation you have with her. So shout out to Priscilla. Thanks for connecting us there. So Jeff is a business advisor and retired AT&T senior vice president, and he's currently an advisory board member to early stage and mature technology companies, lending his expertise in product roadmap and go-to-market strategies. And a couple of those companies include Innovega, which is a company developing a smart contact lens and lens technology, and Globus, a provider of business-to-business portal products and services. He also serves on the board of the United Way of King, where he is the chair of the Business Engagement Committee. And Jeff retired from AT&T last summer after 17 years with the firm. He ended his tenure at AT&T with the responsibility for retail sales and distribution. Jeff led the launch of AT&T's first smartphone in 2002, which I Googled to try and find, but I couldn't figure out which phone that was, so Jeff will have to let us know. And he was responsible for a smart device portfolio through its evolution with deep relationships in the industry. He was the device side lead for the launch of AT&T's 3G and 4G networks. Thank you. And Jeff also ran the network application services group for AT&T's third-party developer program. Prior to joining AT&T, he led practices for 2 technology consulting firms, Lanti Corporation and System House. Jeff spent the first 10 years of his career at IBM, initially in the enterprise technology sales and then in consulting practice management. Jeff has deep roots in Yakima. He's a proud graduate of Eisenhower High School. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Stanford, where he was also a two-time Pac-10 champion wrestler. Today he lives in Duvall, Washington, where he and his wife Laura enjoy biking, skiing, and golfing. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeff Bradley.
Thank you, Kevin, very much for that very nice introduction. Chris, I'm not sure I can follow that up. That was a fabulous prelude to a discussion of 5G. I debated whether to include a discussion about the conspiracy theories that started in the UK around it. Chose not to, but now that you have everyone fully distracted, I'm sure I will picking up some of that topic at the end during that Q&A portion. So with that, let me try and share my screen, and assuming I can do that successfully, we'll get started. There we go. So thank you, Yakima Rotary. It's an honor to join you today, albeit virtually. In case you're wondering, I am not wearing makeup. But I did get a haircut yesterday. And obviously I'm wearing a dress shirt, but I'm not wearing dress pants. Before we get started, I would also like to say hello to my mother, as Kevin did already, Priscilla Forney, who you were kind enough to invite to join as a guest today. She reminded me last night that the last time I was with you all, I recognized Bill Douglas and Craig Mendenhall and Mark Smith in my presentation, but apparently failed to mention her. So with that slight, hopefully remedied, let's get started. 5G is the global standard for the next generation of mobile data networks. Just like 4G networks in the smartphone before it, 5G will enable an entirely new set of disruptive applications and capabilities. Now, because of this tremendous anticipation and potential, it has received intense media coverage and hype. So the discussion we're going to have today will hopefully cut through some of that hype, compare it to its predecessors, introduce you to its core capabilities, and speculate on the new services and platforms it's anticipated to enable. Now, I've tried to make this as non-technical as possible, but as you will unfortunately see, some is unavoidable. So save your questions for the end. Previous versions of wireless networks were designed to primarily serve handsets. Now, 5G broke this trend. The technical standard was designed from the beginning to enable 3 different wireless network styles. The first version of 5G to launch in the US by Verizon and AT&T was what we call fixed wireless broadband. This is essentially a wireless network alternative to cable broadband or DSL for your home. It delivers speeds more than 1 gigabit per second, which is comparable to the fastest speeds you would get from a fiber connection in your home today. And this is the fastest 5G flavor. The next version we have in the US is what I call Classic Mobile. And this is how we use wireless networks to connect devices like smartphones, tablets, and smartwatches. T-Mobile and AT&T have both launched Classic Mobile 5G networks, which they now characterize as having a national footprint. The third flavor, which is not yet launched, is the next iteration of the 5G standard and focused on supporting what we call the Internet of Things, or IoT. And this is the use of a wireless network to connect smart equipment, machines, and sensors to the internet. It's often integrated with an artificial intelligence or AI platform. This flavor of 5G will allow a much larger number of devices to be connected concurrently to a cell sector, reduce the network latency, and deliver much longer battery life. The majority of my discussion today is going to focus on the classic mobile flavor in the US market. So the G in the network phases stands for generation. The industry formally delivers a new generation of wireless network roughly every 10 years. And each of these phases requires mobile carriers to design, build, and deploy an entirely new network equipment infrastructure. So it's a big undertaking. The 2G network standard was the first to deliver digital wireless data service. It enabled the SMS text messaging capability we all know, and it was the first to support what was called data packet transfer, which was previously only available on wireline networks, not available on wireless networks at that time. The first 2G network launched in 1991 in Finland. The US was a laggard in 2G. Amazingly, we didn't see a 2G network until 10 years later, until the early 2000s. In the US, this phase is the period when the major wireless carriers delivered nationwide talk and text. And as you may recall, prior to this period, network coverage and service in the US were kind of regionalized, and the data service was analog and not interoperable with the then wireline internet. Now, there were actually two competing standards that enabled the 3G era, UMTS and CDMA. The Japanese carrier Docomo was the first to launch a commercial 3G network in 2001. They were famous for using it to deliver their iMode service, which was really the first user-friendly mobile internet portal on a handset. But even more significantly, 3G is the network that was ultimately used to deliver the massively disruptive app stores on the iPhone and Android smartphones. As you know, these apps created an entirely new ecosystem of developers and turned the smartphone into the Swiss Army knife we take for granted today. Unlike 2G and 3G, where the US was a relatively late adopter, the US actually led the industry in the implementation of 4G. And 4G came along at roughly the same time as when cloud computing became commercially mainstream. And the combination of the two enabled an explosion in mobile video consumption. Platforms like YouTube, Netflix, and the social media apps became incredibly popular with smartphone users and drove massive amounts of traffic on the wireless networks. Now, AT&T recently shared an amazing statistic about the data traffic growth that they experienced. So from 2007 to 2019, they saw a 470,000% increase in data traffic on their mobile network. Now, that's not 470%, that's 470,000%. It's hard to conceive of the magnitude of that growth. And this chart is an illustration of what that looks like visually. It's not the actual growth they saw, but it's what, if you get 470,000% on a CAGR, that's what it looks like. Now, what's wild about it, it makes it appear that the growth was flat during the first 5 years of this period, when in fact, AT&T was experiencing massive, largely unanticipated growth, driven by being the exclusive carrier to offer the iPhone. So the iPhone launched in June of 2007, and iPhone exclusivity turned out to be a double-edged sword for AT&T. It delivered a significant increase in sales, but its popularity, revolutionary browser, and the App Store created unprecedented network traffic, far beyond what anyone had forecasted. And this forced the wireless industry technology suppliers to scramble to create a next generation of network equipment that could handle the workload. And it required AT&T to invest billions of unplanned capital to catch up and to deliver the necessary capacity. All right, so that brings us to today, where we are in the early days of the latest generation of wireless network, 5G. The US is a relative early leader in the implementation of 5G, but it actually significantly trails China and South Korea in its deployment. I saw a stat this morning that China Mobile, which is only one of the 3 Chinese national carriers, already has more 5G subs than every carrier in the rest of the world combined. So China is full tilt committed to the deployment of 5G. Now, we say it, 5G is a true step change. And when we say that, we tend to focus on the speed. What is even actually more exciting to me is the new categories of services that it will ultimately create. And I'm going to share what most experts believe will be its killer apps at the end of our discussion. Now, as we said, the 5G standard can deliver a major increase in speeds and reduction in latency, but as you're about to see, we have some work to do. So this chart depicts the typical speeds a consumer was or is likely to experience on their smartphone in the real world at 2 different points in the life cycle of a network generation. The first is the typical speed when a network generation is first launched, and the second is after carriers make an interim generational upgrade to their networks. These upgrades are often referred to as 0.5 or .5 releases. The initial version of 2G, called GPRS, delivered typical download speeds of roughly 40 kilobits per second when it launched. Now, carriers subsequently upgraded these 2G networks to what was referred as 2.5G and the speed more than doubled to around 100 kilobits. Now, believe it or not, that was a really big deal at the time. I lived it, I was in the middle of it, and we were very proud of the fact that we could deliver 100 kilobits of IP data nationally. But of course, today that would be far too slow for the simplest of the current generation of mobile apps to operate. 3G was about 10 times faster than its predecessor at launch at 1 megabit per second. Its typical speed quadrupled to around 4 megabits per second with the interim 3.5G upgrade. Now, notice that when we switched from 2G to 3G, we switched from kilobits per second to megabits per second because 3G was much faster. And for reference, 1 megabit equals 1,000 kilobits. 4G was twice as fast as its predecessor when it launched at 8 megabits per second. So that's not that impressive, but the 4.5G release delivered a 5-fold increase in speed to the 40 megabits per second that, frankly, most of us can see in our smartphones today. And as you can see on the chart, it's important to note that every generation was faster than its predecessor at launch. That is until we got to 5G. 5G was actually the same as our current 4.5G networks. Now, there's a variety of reasons why that is the case. The good news is it has the potential to deliver a step change in speed performance, but like I said earlier, we have a little bit of work to do. So let's take a look at what we need in order to realize its true potential. This is a simplified list, but at a high level, we need 5 things to be in place. Starts with a new technical specification designed and ratified globally by the industry. The spec that defines the enhanced mobile broadband version of 5G is called 3GPP Release 15. And you don't really need to know that, and there's not going to be a test at the end. The Release 15 spec was ratified in mid-2018, about a year ahead of schedule. It's kind of an interesting story. So the push to accelerate that standard was driven by the 2018 Olympics in South Korea. You might be asking, how in the world would Winter Olympics influence the next generation of wireless networks? Well, the South Korean government wanted to use hosting the Olympics as an opportunity to showcase their global technology leadership. So they asked Samsung and their 2 national carriers to implement a version of 5G in time for visitors to experience it at the venues. Well, the problem was the 5G standard didn't exist. So they built what they thought it would ultimately become, which was a non-standard implementation. And then to compound this, Verizon saw this as a leapfrog leadership opportunity, and they joined the bandwagon and committed to implement this non-standard version, which freaked the industry out. And they were very fearful that it would lead to mass fragmentation and ecosystem inefficiency. So this created the impetus for that 3GPP standards group I mentioned to finalize the Release 15 spec faster than planned, which it did a year and a half faster than any of its predecessors. So sounds a little bit like vaccine development these days. So the second thing you need, let me go back here, is a smartphone, of course. And the good news is we have a lot of those already in the market, right? What you're looking for is a smartphone with a chipset from Qualcomm. The one that's most popular is the Snapdragon 865. And the latest is from Samsung, who just launched, or announced, I should say, the Galaxy Note 20 last week. So the smartphone is not sort of the long pole in the tent for us to get a true 5G experience. The third element we need is to deploy 5G network equipment and antennas. In the US, as I said, T-Mobile and AT&T have done this at scale, with both now claiming national coverage and 5G support in over 100 markets. Verizon, interestingly, has chosen to focus initially on their ultra-wideband fixed wireless product initially, and has yet to launch a significant 5G classic mobile network. Fourth thing we need is cell towers to have faster broadband wireless connections to transport this massive amount of associated data. So you may not think about it, but your phone connects to a cell phone over a wireless connection, but that cell tower connects to the internet via a wireline connection. So you got to get these big pipes coming out of the cell towers in order to realize the actual speeds. We call it backhaul. Of late, these are typically physical fiber connections to a cell tower. Good news is that US carriers had to do this when they implemented the 4.5G version previously. So while this traffic growth that we're anticipating demands more and more backhaul, the current capacity is generally in good shape. But finally, and most importantly for 5G, we need more and new spectrum. So spectrum are the radio frequencies that all wireless communications travel over. These frequencies are licensed and managed by the FCC and are probably the most precious commodity for a carrier. They spend billions at auctions to buy it, and 5G is going to use it in a very new and different way than its previous generations. So previous to 5G, wireless service was delivered in what we called the low band spectrum. And these are the frequencies that range from 600 megahertz to 2100 megahertz or 2.1 gigahertz. And this is where T-Mobile and AT&T's implementations are today. Their 5G implementations are today. But frankly, there's just not enough low band spectrum to realize the potential speeds of 5G. And this is the point where I will apologize for making this a bit technical, but you'll see in a moment that frankly, there's no way to have a discussion about the deployment of 5G and what we need to do to realize its potential without having a basic understanding of spectrum. So 5G is going to leverage two new tranches. The high band spectrum, often referred to as millimeter wave, operates in the US in the range between 24 gigahertz and 39 gigahertz. You don't have to remember that, but just know it's much higher, roughly 20 times higher than the spectrum used by previous classic mobile generations. And this is the spectrum that we used to deliver that gigabit fixed wireless broadband flavor that I talked about earlier. Now the challenge is that millimeter wave just doesn't travel very far, and it doesn't penetrate buildings very well, and frankly, barely even gets through leaves on a tree. So you need to have the cell tower be very close by with a clean of line of sight to the end location. And in fact, frankly, most implementations today are even requiring people to put a small antenna outside their window in order to be able to get this service. The way that carriers are going to deliver this is by putting a massive amount of small cells, much, much more dense than previous cell phone deployments, on neighborhood light poles or on the sides of nearby buildings in select urban and suburban neighborhoods. I wouldn't expect to see a high band implementation of fixed wireless come to Yakima soon. That's probably isn't a market that you're going to get this early. But the really interesting spectrum for the industry is this mid-band tranche. And this is the spectrum that the industry is counting on to deliver a 100 megabit per second plus classic mobile experience. The frequency segment ranges roughly from 3 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz, but almost all the focus is on what is called the C-band, which ranges from 3.7 to 4.0 gigahertz. This is the spectrum that's currently used by satellite providers, CB radios, and the military. And the FCC plans to host a set of auctions this year and next to repurpose the C-band for 5G. And if you happen to be a wonk like me and you subscribe to news feeds that cover this kind of information, the FCC announced a new auction yesterday, as recently as yesterday, which is, I believe, their third auction that they're planning for the C-band. And it's going to raise billions of dollars in revenue for the government and give the industry the large swath it needs for 5G. Now, as an interesting aside, there is a band that fits kind of in between low band and mid band in the 2.5 gigahertz. And T-Mobile acquired a whole bunch of it when they acquired Sprint. And Sprint got it from a previous acquisition they had made a decade ago. This could end up being a killer advantage for T-Mobile in the 5G race, arms race in the medium term. So enough said on that, but that's just an interesting area for you to watch. Now, the reason that mid-band and high-band spectrum can deliver this step change in speed is the size of the channel it can enable. Historically, most wireless channels were 10 megahertz wide. And you can see by this chart, 5G supports much, much wider channels. It's the difference between driving in a single country lane and an empty superhighway. So you're going to see 100 megahertz wide mid-band channels in the classic mobile space, 10 times bigger than historical, and 400 megahertz wide high band millimeter wave channels in the future. Well, obviously this is the reason that the industry is so anxious for the upcoming C-band auctions. Okay, as we said, 3G delivered the app stores, 4G helped create the video streaming and social media platforms. What innovation and disruption will 5G create? These are the 5 services that many experts expect will be commercialized at scale on 5G. The first is mobile cloud gaming that uses a combination of next-gen cloud compute and 5G's very low latency to replace the need for gaming consoles. Examples of this already in deployment are Microsoft's Project xCloud and Google Stadia. 5G is essential to deliver the instantaneous communications that autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars and smart cities require. The super fast speeds and very low latency of 5G combined with augmented reality will enable robotic surgery and a next generation of telemedicine. A great example of this is a Seattle-based startup that I've had the opportunity to work with called Proprio, P-R-O-P-R-I-O. You can check out their website to get a feel for what the art of the possible is when you combine 5G, augmented reality with spinal surgery. The very low latency of 5G is also perfect for taking automated or robotic manufacturing to the next level. Some fascinating use cases already in the market for that. And finally, 5G will help us see the much hyped augmented reality and virtual reality finally become commercially mainstream. So if you will indulge me, let's close our discussion this afternoon with an intentionally provocative forecast. My prediction, this is just Jeff's prediction, is the service that will define 5G's most widespread disruptive impact will be known as spatial computing. And this is essentially the computing platform and experience that replaces the smartphone as the primary way we access the internet and interact with our apps and services. So instead of having to pull out a 6-inch piece of glass from our pocket or purse, unlock it, navigate to the app we need and press an icon every time we need a service, we're going to wear extended reality or XR glasses that are connected over 5G that proactively deliver the information and services we need and want seamlessly as we move about our day. You won't have to stop and look at your smartphone. The information and images will be projected transparently in front of you via the XR glasses. And it's going to be delivered in concert with the next generation cloud compute instantiation called Mobile Edge Compute, or MEC. And it's fascinating to me that MEC, which is 100% in the compute layer of the stack, something that you would normally say that's the responsibility of Amazon's AWS or Microsoft's Azure, is actually something that the wireless industry contemplated and included in the 5G specification. And what you're essentially doing is moving your most time-sensitive compute activity and data out of the cloud, which can be hundreds of miles away, and to the very edge of the wireless network in these mobile edge compute instantiations, which reduces how long it takes, and it changes the way that applications can be architected. So it's very fascinating. Now, with the launch of 5G, all the requisite building blocks for spatial computing now exist. So in the next 5 years, I believe that someone's going to build a set of XR glasses with an intuitive UI, high resolution display technology with a wide field of vision. It'll have a lightweight and attractive form factor. So no longer do you have to strap on a shoebox to your head to experience it. A computer vision enabled camera will be built into the frame of the glasses. A 5G radio will be built in, and it will, and this might be the hardest, have a battery that lasts all day. Now, all the major players are working on this. Apple is rumored to be launching their first augmented reality glasses in 2022. Google just bought an AR glasses company called North last month. Facebook spent $2.3 billion on a VR company called Oculus a few years back. Qualcomm announced their XR platform, this is really important, in December. And as you probably know, Microsoft is investing heavily in their HoloLens platform. Smartphones existed before the iPhone, but were a bit of a niche and were mostly used by what we called mobile professionals. Apple revolutionized and democratized the smartphone user interface and experience, and it became the ubiquitous mainstream consumer device we all carry around today. So my belief is someone is going to use 5G and MEC to do the same thing with XR glasses and deliver spatial computing as the next generation of computing wave in the next 5 years. Clearly, very sci-fi, right? And only time will tell if I am right. That ends my prepared remarks. I appreciate your time and would be happy to take any questions that you have.
So Jeff, this is Kelly Connaughton. I'm a big fan of your mom and dad. Welcome back to Yakima. This is fascinating. I've been hearing about 5G for so long, but honestly, I would just be happy if I could find a phone that wouldn't drop the call in my kitchen, regardless of 5G or anything else. So is 5G going to impact accessibility so that when we're up at Rimrock or skiing or, you know, some of these other dead zones in central Washington, I mean, will it help that regardless of the network you're on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, when you don't have it, it's frustrating, period, right? Doesn't matter what its potential is and how fancy the specification is. If you don't have connectivity, you can't use it, right? So no, it won't. And I would say in the near term, if you don't have a good 4.5G network connection today where you live, work, and play, you're not going to get 5G soon. So they'll overlay 5G. They won't use it to do infill of coverage gaps. The good news is a couple things. AT&T won a contract with the federal government 3 or 4 years ago called FirstNet, where they were building a separate network for first responders. So they won the federal version of it, and then they had to then go resell it to all 50 states. So they got kind of a right to sell, and they ultimately signed up all 50 states, which is a big win for them commercially. But one of the things they did in every one of those 50 sales was have to commit to do infill gaps. Now that was with first responders in mind, so that if somebody, the sheriff rolled someplace and knew historically they didn't have AT&T coverage, well, they couldn't convert from what they had to this AT&T FirstNet network without filling that in. But the good news is it forced AT&T to make capital investments in network expansion that historically they wouldn't have been able to justify. They couldn't, the ROI just wasn't there. So that's one really good thing. The second is T-Mobile and Sprint. Now, I don't think Sprint's spectrum holdings and network was all that great in the Yakima Valley, so that probably doesn't help you. But for much of the nation, the combination of those two will enhance T-Mobile's network. So both the AT&T and T-Mobile national footprint get bigger. But unfortunately, Kelly, I don't think 5G is going to be the answer to camping at Rimrock. And what I would say is complain. And when you complain, be fact-based, because I used to get these complaints in my inbox. And the more specific you can be about the time of day and the location of where you are specifically, the more actionable it is for the carrier. And so then have your friends and family join with you in your complaining, not whining, fact sharing.
Jeff, I also had a question. I thought it was very fascinating when you talked about the prospect of the glasses, and not to tie into the conspiracy joke earlier on, but in the past we've heard that if you put a phone to your head, that the radio waves could possibly cause some medical issues and links to possibly tumors or anything. Is there any risk with glasses that are going to be fully enabled and on your nose and head 10 hours a day being an issue? Or is that a thought?
Great question. And there's when a phone is launched, they have all these labs and ways that they check where to put the antennas and the modem inside the smartphone to maximize its coverage capability. One of it, you go in and it's these crazy kind of soundproof rooms and radio-proof rooms, and there's literally a fake head that they put the phone onto. So they absolutely, and when they're designing new radio phones and the radio placements and antenna placement, they think about that. So let me just say that is a consideration, and absolutely will be a big consideration for standalone XR glasses. I should say the first version of these things won't have their own standalone 5G radio. They'll be connected initially via cable to your phone, so they'll use your phone's radio, and then eventually they'll have a wireless connection between your headset and your phone, and then eventually miniaturization and cost efficiencies will take over, and you'll be able to build the whole thing, which is what Qualcomm's XR platform's working toward. Separately, I would encourage you to go do the research. There are many, many studies by different agencies, governmental, medical, that, and none of them show any correlation between the use of a smartphone and any kind of negative medical, health outcome. None. There's not a single study. So yes, like other things that get published and they develop a life of their own, and it's slightly understandable. You can hold, and they get hot sometimes, right? I mean, you could understand why that would be a concern, and it's radio waves, an inch from your brain. But there is no medical and there's no scientific correlation between a cell phone and brain tumors. And I've done the research, but I would encourage you, for your own kind of peace of mind, to do the same.
Great, thank you. That's encouraging.
Jeff, I had a question on spectrum. We talk about getting 5G into that medium spectrum. I'm having issues with spectrum right now with my Wi-Fi, and whenever the microwave turns on, and making sure I've got a clear signal. Is there other equipment right now that uses that spectrum that might potentially interfere with 5G, or is it fairly wide open?
Two things. One, obviously Wi-Fi is very different than commercial wireless. And one of the ways it's different, even though they both use spectrum, and Wi-Fi operates, as you probably know, in 5,000 megahertz bands and things like that, but it's unlicensed and it's unmanaged, and therefore you get a lot more things stepping over the top of each other, because you get a lot of different products. Because it's unlicensed, you don't have to go pay billions of dollars to the FCC to get use of it. So that it's more susceptible to interference, right? And to things fighting and interfering with each other. So that's one thing when you think about it as Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is inherently a little bit unreliable because of that, and also because of it. If you remember when I talked about robotic manufacturing, it struck me as odd the first time I saw some use cases around that, why they wouldn't just use inside the walls of a large factory Wi-Fi. Well, it's for that reason. 5G is much more reliable, and ultimately now it's even faster, and it's much more manageable than Wi-Fi. So that's not your question, but Wi-Fi and commercial wireless are very different, because one is licensed, one is unlicensed, one is managed, one is unmanaged. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. As I said, the current mid-band that everyone wants is the C-band. And right now, satellite providers use it to beam down television programs to local TV stations. It's the band that CB radios operate in today, and military uses it. So especially on the coasts where you have military installations and naval installations, there's a lot of use of the C-band. So the thing that, if you read this announcement that came out yesterday from the FCC, the chairman of the FCC spends quite a bit of time talking about the process that will be followed to free up the current uses of that, so that you can have, you won't have interruption. You won't have that conflict between the two uses of it. They won't allow the wireless carriers to launch in it until it's freed up. Just like T-Mobile bought a bunch of 600 megahertz spectrum 3 years ago, and there were local television broadcasters using it. And so the thing that T-Mobile had to go do was go work city by city with getting those guys off of those networks, so they could then in turn redeploy it for their wireless network. So the answer to your question is yes, there is the possibility for interference, but not with consumer devices unless you have a CB radio. But I don't think the FCC will let the wireless carriers into that band until they have properly cleared the predecessors out.
Great, thanks.
We've got time.
Jeff,
We've got time for one more question, if anybody has one last one.
I have one question, Jennifer. This is Dwayne. Jeff, can you give a quick comparison of these 5G wireless speeds and latencies to what actually exists already in hardwired connections, like a gigabit internet,
Right.
Ethernet network? How do they compare to these 5G speeds?
Yeah, great question. So when I talked about the 3 flavors, the first was called fixed wireless. And that's the one using this millimeter wave and then 400 megahertz channel, which is astounding. And it uses beam forming technology and all this crazy stuff to be able to put a giant pipe to the window at your house. And then, assuming that you've been willing to do it, you probably have put a small antenna outside that window. If you've done all that and the carriers put a small cell on a light pole in your neighborhood, you'll get at least 1 gigabit. And that's as fast as Comcast, who tends to be considered, you know, the fastest, or even AT&T's fiber implementations in 22 states, not Washington, that they can achieve today. So the fixed wireless broadband version of 5G, which is one of the 3 flavors I discussed, is as fast as the fastest current cable or fiber to home speeds that you're seeing. The problem is it's a tough ROI. So it's not going to be deployed at our scale where you're going to displace. And if an existing ISP can't make the justification to pull fiber to your neighborhood today, the wireless carrier is probably not able to make that ROI work either. So it would be awesome if it could be used as an infill where you just have legacy slow DSL. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. But the short answer to your question is the 2 are very comparable, but that's not the flavor you're going to see on your smartphone. It's the flavor that you would see when you replace your router in your house with the current provider with one that provided by Verizon or AT&T.
So the just to correlate to that, the implementation of all these new applications in 5G, why can't they be implemented on the current hardwired network other than mobility issues?
But it's mobility. I mean, mobility is the game changer. I mean, it changes the potentiality of a use case dramatically. So there are certain things you can do at home, and there's certain things you can do with telemedicine, but there's lots of places that don't have gigabit speeds. So unfortunately for the guys that have to build the capacity of the networks, a lot of people will use their phones and the hotspot capability of their phones as their home internet connection because it's often faster than what they can get from an ISP. But short answer, Martin, is it's the mobility element, and that's what proved to be the game changer when everybody learned how to use an iPhone, and it created an entire new category of application services that prior to it didn't exist and would never have existed. So great question, thank you. And by the way, Kevin, the answer to your question is the BlackBerry 5810, and it launched in April of 2002. It was the first device that I launched when I joined AT&T.
Thank you for circling back on that.
Yeah.
Who remembers BlackBerry? I'm just kidding.
Depending on your age, everyone does, right? I mean, it's how we connected to each other and first learned messaging on a phone.
Yeah.
BlackBerry is my first business phone, so I'm not that young.
Jeff, this is a question from Sharon Miracle, who's president of the Yakima Valley Community Foundation. And she would like you to speak on the state's commitment to equal access by 2024 and the need for Yakimans to, I guess, a single click thing. They need to get 100,000 people to be able to get the speed of the valley. Do you know anything about that?
I don't, but I know who would. So if she wants to email me, I'm happy to put her in touch with the person who he's responsible for all those kinds of activities at the state and federal level, representing 3 or 4 Northwest states. And so I'm happy to have him give you an update on that equal access. I'm not familiar with it.
Well, Jeff, I'd like to thank you so very much for taking the time to be our program today. That was absolutely fascinating, and I can't even, it boggles my mind to think of the applications for this technology. It's really going to be exciting to watch it progress. I'm sure that there's some fantastic applications for Rotary too with all of that technology, so thank you.
No doubt, my pleasure, and it's wonderful to see everyone again, and hopefully the next time we can do this in person. So stay well.
I appreciate that. And in honor of you speaking today, we will be making a donation in your name to Yakima Rotary Charities. And those donations support all of our charitable giving in the Valley and our scholarship program. So again, we really thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Next up, Bob Gerst is going to share with us our Rotarians Are Going Places segment before we adjourn. Bob.
So since Jeff told you what he did to prepare for today's meeting, let me tell you kind of what I did. First of all, I didn't get a haircut. Second, I didn't wear a dress shirt. And third, well, I'm not even going to tell you about my pants situation. So Connie will probably never ask me to do this again. Our first Rotarian on the move is Nicole Donegan. Perhaps some of you saw the wonderful article that headlined Nicole, who's the managing director.
I'm doing a little better than I was, but still, my eyes are getting really stuck.
Who was managing director for the field group in the July 26 Yakima Herald issue. Perhaps while you were driving on North 40th Avenue, you got a glimpse of the sea of red flags that represented so many in our Yakima area that tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. As you know, the field group works in a variety of advising. The Red Flag Project was a public health campaign for the Yakima Health District. Great work, Nicole. We're proud that you're a Yakima downtown Rotarian doing fantastic work for our community. Oh, and congratulations on purchasing a new home recently. Another Rotarian on the move. Our second Rotarian on the move is Eric Silvers. Congratulations is in order for past President Eric Silvers. Eric just celebrated his 30th year anniversary with State Farm Insurance. We know that Eric is an incredible Rotarian, but did you know he's an outstanding insurance agent for our Valley? Just how many lives has Eric helped over his 30-year career? Too many to mention, I'm sure. However, when tragedy occurs in the lives of others, Eric's clients are extremely happy that he is their insurance agent to help them manage the tough times. And did you know that Eric is such a great father and role model? His two sons are State Farm agents now working on the west side of the state. We are proud to have one of our own lifelong Yakima superheroes taking care of so many, and he truly makes a difference in the lives of others. If I could please ask our Rotary group today to give our two Rotarians on the move a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that. So looking forward to next week, our program is going to be Troy Stang to talk about the political climate in the other Washington. Following that will be Leo Mueller talking about Choices Education Group. And then the week after that, Justice Raquel Montoya Lewis, Native American Supreme Court Justice, will be joining us. So again, our Rotarians are going places, even if it is on Zoom. I want to thank you all that contributed to our meeting today and thank everyone for joining in. We are officially adjourned.